This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour and welcome to Unique Scotland, the go-to podcast on all things Scottish. And I'm delighted to have you with me on this tour of a wonderful part of Scotland. It's actually on the coast just to the east of Edinburgh, and it's called East Lothian. Now there may be a wee bit of bias here because this is the area where I live and I broadcast from. And for those of you who listen frequently, you'll know my village Aberlady is a tiny hamlet within the County of EAST LOTHIAN. My next podcast was to be my series on Glasgow, but I've put that on hold to bring this lovely part of the world to you, because it sort of complements my Borders podcast that I've just concluded, and is adjacent to that area, so there is some logic in my madness. The difference with East Lothian is that it also has a beautiful coastline, and we will be visiting some of the towns and villages along the coast as we tour this area. This podcast also complements the Visit East Lothian podcast, where I was interviewed by Gary Spence of Fourth One Radio, and we had some fun chatting about the area. Well, as I broadcast, it's now the beginning of November, and winter is creeping its way in, with a mild October now giving way to a colder spell, with temperatures dropping to 5 degrees centigrade or 42 degrees Fahrenheit. The pink-feeted geese, well, they're settling into the nature reserve. The starlings are hunkering down for the midwinter, and Minnie, our spaniel dog, is just loving diving into the piles of leaves in the park. And the poor pheasants or squirrels who are minding their own business in the local woods, foraging amongst those leaves, get the fright of their lives as Minnie dashes past at 100 miles an hour on her hunt for the perfect scent. Bless her. Anyway, today's podcast, which is episode 1 of a 2-part series, will take us along the coast to the east of Edinburgh from the town of Musselburgh, through Longniddry, my own village of Aberlady, Gullane and Dirleton. And on the way, we'll see some amazing coastline, fabulous beaches. There's castles, grand houses, an aircraft museum housing a Concorde aircraft, and golf courses galore. East Lothian is known as Scotland's Gulf Coast, boasting 22 courses along its stunning coastline, with the largest concentration of championship links golf courses anywhere in the world. And these include the Renaissance Club, which plays host to the Scottish Open, and Muirfield, which has hosted many Open Championships itself. East Lothian has great history too, with Bonnie Prince Charlie scoring a hit against the British Army at Prestonpans, and Mary Queen of Scots' penultimate battle which led to her downfall and abdication. It's going to be an exciting whirlwind tour, so stand by. At the end of the podcast, we'll be hearing from Lisa and Jan from Cleveland, Ohio, who are avid podcast listeners, and they surprised me at Culloden Battlefield. Well done, ladies, and as promised, you're on this podcast. You'll also hear from Barbara and Chris, 2 lovely guests from Texas who travelled with me around Scotland. Barbara's an Outlander fan, and I surprised her with a visit to Lallybroch at the end of our tour, and you can hear how she reacted. Well, to see some great photographs of East Lothian, the beaches, the golf courses and castles, then have a look at my website, exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk, under the podcast section, my Facebook page or even Instagram. And if you listen through my website, please don't forget to subscribe to ensure you get notification of future episodes. There will be short videos of East Lothian on my YouTube channel, Exclusive Scottish Visits, so please subscribe there to get notification of all my travels. Well, wherever you are in the world, I'd now like you to relax and to join me on this tour of the east coast of Edinburgh, East Lothian. It's a windy morning, but mild for this time of year, and the sun is just creeping up over the village. I've just been down at the water's edge by Aberlady Bay, and the tide was out with the wading birds scurrying around to enjoy their morning feast of aquatic organisms, with worms hiding in the mud or molluscs and crustaceans hiding under the rocks. And the birds I saw this morning were oyster catchers, and you can detect their very high-pitched tweet. I also saw long-legged curlews with long curved beaks allowing them to forage under the shallow water. Welcome to East Lothian. Well, I made a short recording of my walk this morning, and here's a taste of what I enjoy. It's a fabulous morning. The sun's just coming up over Aberlady behind me, with the church in the silhouetted background. As I turn round, looking down across the bay, the tide's out, lots of wading birds. Just listen to the sound. Amazing. There's actually a flock of pink-feeted geese flying overhead just as I look now. Wonderful sight. There must be at least 300 or 400 birds up there. There must be about 4 or 5 V-shaped formations. What an amazing sight. A few stragglers just at the end, saying bye. Well, what a real privilege to get a sight of that. It's just as I was walking down by the water's edge, I saw the V formations coming towards me, and they flew right across the top, as you could hear. Really lovely. Well, I've been looking forward to telling you all about East Lothian, not only because I live here, but because it's a hidden gem, an area of natural beauty, and one that deserves the attention of the discerning traveller. Yes, the mountains, the highlands, the lochs, the glens, as well as the Western Isles, they need to be seen to get a real feel for the Scotland that we all know and love so well. But if you're coming from abroad with time on your hands, then a day or two out of Edinburgh to see this part of the world is a must. If you live in the UK, and many of my listeners do, then spend some time here and enjoy the beaches or the wonderful coastal walks, perhaps visiting this particular bird sanctuary, or take in some history in the magnificent castles or historical sites that you're going to hear about shortly. Okay, well, let's get on the road. Now, if you look at a map, you'll see just east of Edinburgh the town of Musselburgh, and that's where I intend to start the East Lothian tour. In this episode 1, we will continue east until we get to Dirleton, and, as well as the coastal towns and villages, I will highlight a couple of islands just off the coast, such as Fidra Isle, which has a Robert Louis Stevenson connection. That's our own famous author who wrote The Strange Case of Dr Jekyll and Mr Hyde, as well as a few other famous novels. I recall my first visit to Musselburgh as a teenager, and the reason for going was that my sister Margaret had bought a house there with her husband Richard. It was a new 3-bedroom semi-detached house on an estate called Stony Hill, which was named after a local mansion house called Stony Hill House that dates from the mid-1700s. And before I tell you more about Musselburgh, I'd love to share with you my research and a wee story on Stony Hill House, which I discovered was owned by the notorious army officer Colonel Francis Charteris, born 1675, whose nickname was the Rape Master General. Yes, I did say that, the Rape Master General. He was known in his own circles, and despised in many, as a rake lusting after any young woman in his orbit. To satisfy this lust, he had contacts who would recruit young women as servants, and, once in his employ, he would force himself upon them. He was a very wealthy and powerful individual, but one young woman stood up against him, a young lady called Anne Bond, who refused his advances. When she tried to leave the house, Charteris ordered his servants to stop her. He locked her in his bedroom and eventually raped her. The story is quite incredible, but of course resonates with some of today's shenanigans with very wealthy men such as Epstein and Al-Fayed of Harrods fame. Incredibly, for that period, Charteris was arrested and charged with rape, and at his trial he was found guilty and convicted of raping the poor girl and sentenced to hang. However, friends in very high places meant that he never met the hangman's noose, but ironically, and as luck and fate would have it, he died soon afterwards anyway, probably from some disease picked up in prison. That's what we call karma. Well, his is quite a story, including being dismissed from the army 4 times, but I'll let you read up on that yourselves, if you're interested. Let's return now to Musselburgh, the town. When you enter Musselburgh from the west, having just driven from Edinburgh, you'll see the signpost with the words, "Welcome to the Honest Toon," It actually means welcome to the honest town. This honour dates from 1332, when Scotland's regent, the Earl of Murray, died in the town after a long illness. He had been cared for lovingly by the townsfolk during his illness, so when the new regent, the Earl of Mar, was appointed, they were offered a reward for their care. Well, the people of the town declined the reward, saying that they were only doing their duty, which impressed the new regent to such an extent that he declared that the townspeople of Musselburgh were a set of honest men, thus the title of Honest Toon. Now, I've just talked about Stony Hill House. Well, one other grand house in the town is New Hales, a fabulous Palladian manor house dating from the 1700s. Its previous name was White Hill, but it was renamed when the Dalrymple family bought the estate in 1709, changing the name to New Hales after their original family seat of Hales Castle in East Lothian. It stands in 100 acres of designed landscape and had fallen into some disrepair before the National Trust for Scotland were gifted the house by Sir Mark Dalrymple in 1997. They've done a marvellous job in its restoration and also in uncovering some absolute hidden gems within the landscape. There's actually been an archaeological investigation over the last 20 years, and what has surfaced is the remains of a designed landscape including woodland groves and garden buildings, which include a shell house or a grotto, a tea house, a terrace walk, bridges, archways, and a monument to the Earl of Stair. Now, you know what I'm going to say. Do visit if you are in the area. You'll love it, and by the way, if you join the National Trust for Scotland, you get in absolutely free, as well as access to over 100 other properties and historic sites around Scotland. Musselburgh is the largest settlement in East Lothian, with around 22,000 people. Its name probably derives from Old English, where the mussel refers to the huge mussel and oyster beds that used to be found at the mouth of the River Forth, upon which Edinburgh sits. Sadly, they've long gone. But these foodstuffs were the staple diets of the poor in the past, and a tiny amount of meat, mixed with oysters in a pie, sustained families that would not have had easy access to beef, which tended to be the domain of the rich. Having said that, beef and oyster pie today, of course, will cost you an arm and a leg, and is considered a delicacy. Musselburgh was a fishing town, but the end of the herring boom in the 19th century ended that trade. Today, Musselburgh is a commuting town to Edinburgh and hosts an excellent golf club, which is a former Open Championship course, and there's also a race course which dates from 1777. The town was actually first settled by the Romans in the 1st century, when they built a fort not far from the mouth of the River Esk, which runs through the centre of the town. The bridge they built over the river was the main approach to the east coast to Edinburgh. It lasted for many years and was only replaced in the 1200s by a bridge built on the original Roman foundations, with a further upgrade in around 1600, and it's still known today as the Roman Bridge and is a pedestrian walkway. The new road bridge upstream was built around 1800 and widened in 1925. One of the oldest buildings to be found in the town is the Musselburgh Tollbooth, which is a long, narrow 3-storey building built around 1590, with alterations in the mid-17 and 1800s. The square tower may have belonged to an earlier toll booth, probably from about 1400s, but this toll booth was destroyed by the Earl of Hertford in 1544. Now, the ground floor was used for weekly markets and the first floor for a prison. And 2 inmates were Margaret Joe in 1628 and Janet Lyle in 1661, and both were tried for witchcraft. Margaret Joe must have had a good lawyer because she was subsequently released, but sadly Lyle was convicted, brutally strangled, and then burnt at the stake. In 1745, some Jacobite soldiers of Bonnie Prince Charlie's army were imprisoned here before their transportation overseas. Now, at the end of the building is an 18th century townhouse, and there's a small museum within the toll booth in the old jail where you can discover Musselburgh's long and fascinating history from Roman times to the present day. It also has displays that showcase working, domestic and social life of the town and also the surrounding area. The museum was opened in 2011, and as well as its permanent displays, it has new themed exhibitions every year, providing something of interest for everyone. Interestingly, in the 1850s, a large hall was built behind the toll booth as part of the centenary celebrations commemorating Sir Walter Scott's death. In fact, you can see a plaque on the wall of the toll booth recording that Scott resided in Musselburgh while he was serving as a quartermaster in the Royal Edinburgh Volunteer Light Dragoon Guards during the Napoleonic Wars. I'm often asked, where does the stone come from to build some of our beautiful buildings? And they're either from quarries locally or actually taken from buildings that have been demolished. and during the construction of the toll booth, stones were taken from the chapel of Our Lady of Loretto, a church within Musselburgh, which was destroyed in 1560 as part of Scotland's Reformation. As it happens, this chapel served as a hospital following the Battle of Pinkie in 1547. Now, I won't go into too much detail, but the Battle of Pinkie was one of the battles fought during the Rough Wooing in 1547, when King Henry VIII of England was a little upset by the fact the Scottish lords would not allow Mary, Queen of Scots, to marry his son Edward. More of that in another podcast. As far as the town size is concerned, it's interesting to note that in the 1800s, the town was centred around the east and west banks of the River Esk, but from 1950s onwards, there were major private and public housing developments, and the population increased considerably. Well, one of those developments was the Stony Hill development, where my sister bought her house. So we're back at the start of the story, and a perfect place to stop and move further along the coast to the town of Prestonpans. Well, I'm just going to draw breath slightly, and before we head along the coast further, I'd like to visit the site of the Battle of Carbery Hill, where on the 15th of June 1567, Mary Queen of Scots met the rebel Confederate lords who took up arms against her, resulting in her downfall. On leaving Musselburgh, drive south on the A6124. It's actually called Carbery Road, and follow the road round when it becomes the B6144. Half a mile further on, you'll see an opening in the stone wall with a tiny sign showing Mary Queen of Scots Mount. It's not easy to see as it's a bit overgrown, but you can go through here, up a wooded path, and come out onto the place where Mary, with her army, faced down the rebel lords. There's a stone obelisk with Mary 1567 written on it, and without getting into too much detail about Mary Queen of Scots, which will be the subject of a separate podcast, Mary's husband, Lord Darnley, had been murdered, and Mary's lover, Lord Bothwell, was implicated in the dastardly deed. He was tried for the murder, but 4,000 of his own troops in Edinburgh probably convinced the Lord's Justice to come to the right decision, and he was acquitted. That could have been the end of it, but Mary Queen of Scots foolishly decided to marry Bothwell, and this was the last straw for the Scottish nobles. The two armies met on Carbery Hill, and there was a long standoff until Mary agreed to leave the field on the promise that Bothwell would be allowed to go free. Well, Mary was taken back to Edinburgh, effectively a prisoner, then locked up in Lochleven Castle for about a year. She was forced to abdicate in favour of her one-year-old son, who would become James VI of Scotland and eventually James I of England. Well, the life of Mary Queen of Scots is absolutely fascinating, and I look forward to telling you all about it some stage in the future. Anyway, let's get back onto the coast road and return to the A190 from Musselburgh, and within 10 minutes you'll have reached the town of Prestonpans. It's a small town with around 10,000 of a population, and gets its name from the numerous salt pans that used to litter its coast. In the 12th century, salt was a prized possession, and all that was needed was a source of fuel for a fire and some seawater or brine. Large rectangular pans of brine would have sat above grates to boil the brine and produce salt. A simple but lucrative activity, and as it happens, there were outcrops of coal on the coast, and the monks of Newbattle took advantage of this commodity to enrich their order. The town was originally called Althamer, but the name was changed to Prestonpans after a local castle named Preston Tower, which I'll tell you about shortly, and also the association with the pans to make salt. As you drive through the town, you'll see large housing estates at either end, with a small commercial centre in the middle. In the centre, and up in a mound, is the old church Preston Grange, one of the first post-Reformation churches in Scotland, built around 1596. It was renovated in 1774, but still has that medieval feel about it. Another old building, Victorian this time, which you'll find as you drive along the main road next to the sea, is the Old Town Hall, which has been turned into a museum. But not just any museum. This is the Battle of Prestonpans Jacobite Museum, which tells the story of Bonnie Prince Charlie's first major battle against the British Army. This victory sealed his position in Scotland as a real contender to take the throne of Great Britain for his father James VIII of Scotland, who was in exile in Italy. The gallery contains historical and archaeological artefacts, an impressive diorama of the battlefield landscape, and an excellent video of the events leading up to the battle and its aftermath. I visited recently with my two younger grandsons, and the staff were super. looking after them and getting them involved with the displays. So my thanks go out to Margaret, Alex and Wee, who did an amazing job in keeping the museum open, and all their hard work in keeping this very important story in Scotland's history alive. More of the battle later, but it's a great little starting point before you go and visit the site of the battle, and one I would highly recommend. I was delighted to catch up with the curator of the museum, Dr Arran Johnston, and he's also the director of the Scottish Battlefield Trust, and his knowledge of the subject is second to none. And here's our conversation. Arran, how good to speak to you, and thank you for taking time out to have a chat with us today.
That's my pleasure.
Can you just tell us how you came to be connected to the Prestonpans Museum and also the battlefield?
I've always been fascinated by the story of this battle and its place in the wider Jacobite story ever since I was a boy growing up in Derby, where the Jacobite army turned around in 1745. So when I moved up to Scotland at about 18, one of the first things I did was visit Prestonpans battlefield. And over the years, done a lot of research and investigation on the site. And then, in about 2010, I was asked by the Heritage Trust that was setting up in Prestonpans if I would get involved as a trustee and as the coordinator of their research and their events programs.
And when you first came across the town hall in the middle of Prestonpans, what state was it in?
Well, Prestonpans Town Hall is an old Victorian building, and it had been mothballed by the council and was sitting empty. So the Battle of Prestonpans Heritage Trust decided to take it on as a museum. So I was given the task of turning it into a museum space. I was able to, mostly working on my own because that was all we were allowed to do at the time, get up the ladders and completely renovate the interiors and learn a lot of new skills as I went along. And then the joy of being able to put all of my research on the battle into words and get the collection of the trust on display.
So all the words we see in the museum, they're yours? And
Yes, I have to accept all responsibility for those. So I welcome all challenges.
Okay, great. And the paint on the wall, you obviously painted it as well?
Yes, and I went back into the archives to discover what the colour scheme had been when the building was first opened in 1897, and tried to bring it something close back to that, and so it was both a chance to bring the story of the battle to visitors, but also to bring a much loved but much neglected asset in the town back to life.
Yeah, it's marvellous. I mean, having visited, I was really very impressed indeed. Now, the site of the battle, there has been some controversy, but could you now, as the expert, tell us, is it in the right place?
Yes, basically what happened, and Prestonpans isn't unique in this experience, is that the battlefield shrinks over successive generations. Basically, over the years, it's been pinpointed as it happened in this one small field here. And then, of course, when you start investigating it properly again, it re-expands. We commissioned a lot of archaeological work back in 2009, which Glasgow University did for us. And then subsequently, I've done a lot of documentary evidence research as well. And we can be pretty clear. This is a really well-documented battle from both sides, and so one of the great opportunities with Prestonpans is that you can really get into the meat of exactly what happened and where individual people even were during the course of the battle.
Yes, indeed. The one thing that I have heard down the years in terms of the battle itself was that Bonnie Prince Charlie had a fairly well organised army, but General Cope's army were a bunch of ragtag soldiers, home guard, if you were. But that's not true, is it?
No, it was pretty convenient for the government at the time to try and diminish the capabilities of General Cope's army because it had been defeated apparently so very easily, and so you don't want to have to put in the newspapers that a full professional army has been defeated. But that's what happened. The soldiers in General Cope's army were trained in exactly the same way as every other British army soldier. A lot of them hadn't seen a full-scale battle. Not surprising for most of our history in terms of our soldiers, but we still expect them to be able to do it when it's required. So it was a full-time professional army with an advantage in firepower, artillery and cavalry, and so it really was an unexpected victory for the Jacobites.
Yes, we've just been chatting, but a fascinating fact for me, Bonnie Prince Charlie's ability to head south to Derby probably was helped by the fact that he defeated General Cope's army.
Undoubtedly so. I mean, firstly, of course, there's the morale effect of having secured a battlefield victory, and that you're then able to retire to the capital, which you've also captured, parading the captured standards of your enemy. It suddenly makes everybody take you much more seriously. And so recruitment is massively by this success. But perhaps almost as important of that is the fact that on the battlefield at Prestonpans, the Jacobite army captures intact the artillery train of the British Army, the baggage train of the British Army, wagons loaded up with ammunition, wagons loaded up with tents and supplies, the military treasury, the paperwork of the British Army command, all captured intact. That gives them the logistical requirements for expanding an army and using it properly.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm a retired naval officer myself and a logistician, and I fully understand what a huge part logistics plays in any battle. Arran, thank you so much. It's been fascinating just having this short chat. I'd like to chat some more. I know you've got a book on the Battle of Prestonpans. Could you just tell me about that, please?
Yes, I've got a book published by Helion, and it's called On Gladsmuir Shall the Battle Be? And that looks in very great detail on the Prestonpans battlefield landscape and the days leading up to it. I've also looked at the wider campaign from the perspective of Charles Edward as a military commander in a book called The Battles of Bonnie Prince Charlie. So all that information is hopefully out there for people to explore. And
can we get that on Amazon Books?
You certainly can, yes.
Marvellous. Okay, well, you've just sold another 2 books, certainly from me anyway. Thank you so much. Well, Arran, listen, can I just say thank you. Very much appreciate the time you've taken out of your busy schedule to join me on the Unique Scotland podcast, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you once more to Dr Arran Johnston, the Director of the Scottish Battlefield Trust. And just to clarify, Dr Johnston's book on Prestonpans is called On Gladsmuir Shall the Battle Be. Well, Gladsmuir is a small village quite close to Prestonpans, which is why sometimes the battle is called the Battle of Gladsmuir. Well, moving on from that wonderful history, today Prestonpans appears to be a quiet commuter town, but it wasn't always like that. It used to have a fairly heavy coal industry, a number of breweries, some brick making, a soapworks, as well as very busy fishing port, but these have all gone. The harvesting of oysters used to be a very lucrative trade up until the end of the 20th century as well, but that ended with the destruction of the oyster beds in the River Forth. However, if you're interested in the history of heavy industry, then Preston Grange Visitor Centre within Prestonpans may be for you. Today, Preston Grange is a quiet haven for wildlife, but looking at the derelict industrial buildings left behind, one can imagine the noise, the coal dust, the steam from the powerful steam engines, and the area teeming with manual labourers to keep this industry going. Within the town itself, there are a number of sculptures, and one that intrigues me is the memorial to the witch trials. Now, Prestonpans was one of the worst areas affected in Scotland during the witch trials of the late 16th century. 81 townswomen and some men, as well as some animals, were executed in a horribly barbaric way for practising witchcraft. This monument was the work of the Glasgow-based sculptor Andy Scott. You might recall he created the Kelpies near Linlithgow, and also East Lothian's huge bear called Dun Bear, which I'll be telling you about when we get down to Dunbar. Locals and visitors admire this 10-foot witch memorial depicting a lady reading a book. As a postscript to this barbaric period in Scotland's history, it's pleasing to note that 81 Scots convicted of being witches and executed were pardoned on Halloween 2004 in Prestonpans. Their innocence was publicly declared by members of the Scottish Government, and those poor people can now rest comfortably in their graves and the afterlife, if of course you believe in one. Well, if you drive around the town, you'll come across an old ruined tower house called Preston Tower, which I mentioned briefly earlier, which is an ancient keep dating from the mid-15th century. It had 4 stories originally, but 2 more were added in 1626, and you can see the initials on one of the windows, SIDKH, and they stand for Sir John and Dame Catherine Hamilton. It has clearly been stabilised, and there's a set of modern steps leading up to the entry doorway. There's good information board at the entry to the castle, and it's a nice wee place to visit. Leaving the town of Prestonpans behind, if you now drive away from the town towards the Meadow Mill Sports Centre, you will see a small stone-built cairn at the junction of 2 roads to commemorate the Battle of Prestonpans. What you will definitely see is a large mound on the right-hand side which looks like a pyramid, on top of which is a flagpole, and that is the viewpoint pyramid which has been sculpted out of an old coal bing or waste material from the coal mine which has built up over the years, in the 1960s when the open cast mine was closed. And there's ample parking at the Meadowmill Sports Centre if you wish to climb to the top of the viewpoint to see the information boards which give a good account of the battle. Now, the Battle of Prestonpans was one of Bonnie Prince Charlie's victories in his attempt to take the crown back for his exiled father, James VIII. In 1745, he had made his way from France to the island of Eriska and marched all the way past Glenfinnan to Edinburgh, gaining access to the city but not taking the castle. He billeted in Holyrood Palace when he marched out to meet the British army at Prestonpans. It was this battle success against a superior British army led by General Cope that gave Prince Charles the huge morale boost he needed before heading south in an attempt to take London and place a Stuart king back on the throne of Great Britain. It's an incredibly audacious story, and this Jacobite tale will be the subject of a future podcast, so watch the space for more information. Continuing east, we pass through the joint towns of Cockenzie and Port Seton. Cockenzie dates back to the 1500s as a small fishing port, and with a slightly larger port called Seton, which was built in the mid-1600s by Lord Seton, thus the name of this small town. The population is only around 4,000, and the harbour still operates small fishing vessels, albeit more shellfish than whitefish these days. It's now a dormitory town for Edinburgh City, but enjoys some tourism with a long sandy beach and a caravan park overlooking the water. I have two connections with the town. The first is that I've stayed in a caravan at the park for a short summer holiday with my nephew James, Diane and their family, and the young children were never far away from the beach. My second was in the 1980s when I was the navigating officer of HMS Orkney based at the Royal Naval Base at Rosyth. Cockenzie had a huge coal-burning power station whose massive chimneys were clearly visible from the sea, and I recall using those chimneys to navigate from, as they were one of the most prominent landmarks and easily identifiable on my chart and the shore. This power station has now been demolished as the country moves away from fossil fuels. If you're in the area and the beach has lost its appeal, there's a hidden gem just south of Port Seton in the form of a lovely church, the Seton Collegiate Church, which stands not far from Seton Castle, and I'll come to that shortly. Seton Church dates from the late 1400s. It's probably one of the finest medieval collegiate churches in Scotland, built by Lord Seton, and, as was common in those days, he established a community of priests to pray for his family's salvation, effectively buying a free pass through the pearly gates of heaven. The church is now in the care of Historic Environment Scotland, and a visit is very worthwhile. Nearby you may get a glimpse of Seton Castle, or Seton Hall. This is an exquisite late 18th century Scottish baronial castle built by the acclaimed architect Robert Adam. The present castle, which is in private hands, used the stone from Seton Palace, which was also demolished in the 18th century. It's a fabulous mansion house and was Robert Adam's final project in Scotland. Castellated features such as slit windows and turrets are evident, with secret staircases, curved doors, curved walls, arched windows, and hidden doors adding to the charm of the interior. Sorry to say, as it's a private house, it cannot be visited, but I can report that it's up for sale and just waiting for one of you lucky listeners to make a bid. The price tag now, November 2024, is offers over £8 million. So start emptying the piggy bank, get on the phone to Savills, the selling agent, and see if you can secure it for yourself. I must declare now that I'm not on commission with Savills, but I thought you'd like to hear what a very nice mansion house would cost you in Scotland. Well, we continue moving down the coast and we come to a small town called Longniddry. Just before we arrive, you'll notice on the left-hand side a lovely beach, one of many that I'll be discussing on the way down to Dunbar. There's 3 beaches called Longniddry Bents, and these are a combination of sand and rock shore used by families and bird enthusiasts. You'll also see thrill seekers in the form of kiteboarders or kite surfers who appear in their numbers when the wind is blowing a gale. The speeds they go and the heights they reach as they're being blown along is an extraordinary sight, and I have to admire their strength, resilience and daredevil attitude. You certainly wouldn't find me on one of those. Longniddry itself is a mile inland and is a small town of around 2,500 people. It has a small set of shops, post office, a scout hut and a library. Its main advantage is that it has a direct bus and train line to Edinburgh and North Berwick. And if I'm going into the city, I prefer to leave my car at the station car park, which is only 5 minutes from Aberlady, and take the train which takes me up to the centre of Edinburgh City. As you drive up to the train station from the shore, you will see on the left-hand side an impressive, imposing arched entry with a gatehouse to the side of the arch. This is one of the original entry points to the grand Gosford estate, which covers around 5,000 acres of parkland and coast. Now, in previous podcasts, you will have heard me mention that when I take Minnie, my spaniel, for a walk, I walk in woods at the rear of my house and down a track to the fabulous Gosford House. Well, this is the estate that I'm talking about. So before we go on to Aberlady, let me tell you a little bit about Gosford House. Gosford House is a fabulous neoclassical country house built by the 7th Earl of Wemyss of the Charteris family between 1790 and 1800, to plans by the architect Robert Adam, who I mentioned earlier was the architect for Seaton Castle. It has wonderful views across the Firth of Forth and up to Edinburgh, and at the rear the views take in a superb parkland laid out with ponds, walkways and tree-lined avenues. Within the grounds are a number of monuments and small buildings, such as an ice house, a boathouse, but the most impressive structure is the Wemyss Mausoleum, a pyramid-style structure in which the 7th Earl and the only member of the family is buried. The shape of the structure is symbolic of the Freemasons, as he was the Grand Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. I have to say it's pretty impressive. You will recall that I mentioned earlier Colonel Francis Charteris, who escaped the hangman's noose. Well, there is a connection here in that Colonel Charteris married Helen Swinton, the daughter of Alexander Swinton, and their daughter Janet married James Wemyss, the 5th Earl of Wemyss, in 1720, and his grandson Francis Wemyss Charteris became the 7th Earl of Wemyss, who I've just talked about, who's in the mausoleum, and that was in 1732 when he inherited his grandfather's estates. Amazing connections in this particular area. Well, continuing along the coast road from Longniddry, we pass the front entrance to Gosford House, and you will have noticed a long wall all the way around the estate. This entrance is similarly impressive as the previous one, with a gatehouse either side of a gated entrance. As we continue along the road, the A189, we eventually come to the lovely wee village of Aberlady. On the right-hand side, the large wall of Gosford Estate, and on the left, the grounds of Craigielaw Links Golf Course, which overlooks Aberlady Bay, and a second golf course, Kilspindy, lies just beyond. Aberlady village is certainly old, and there's archaeological evidence of a significant Anglo-Saxon settlement dating from the 7th to the 10th centuries. And Aberlady Bay, where I go for my morning walks, used to be an important harbour for the town of Haddington nearby, where fishing and whaling were the main industries. It has long silted up and has now been designated as a conservation area, and you can see this bay on a couple of my YouTube channels where I've captured some of the sunrises and sunsets. And of course you heard some of the birds at the beginning of the podcast as I was walking along this bay with Minnie. As you enter the village, on the left-hand side there is a quaint lawn bowling club established in 1888. Just beyond is a very picturesque church, and there's been a church on this site probably from the 12th century. The present church was built in the 15th century with a few alterations and additions. The tower and 2 aisles are the only original bits left, and the rest of the building dates from around 1887, rebuilt by the 10th Earl of Wemyss, with some lovely adornments and stained glass windows. Just before you enter the grounds to the church, there's an original louping-on stane, or in English, a leaping-on stone, effectively a stone set of steps leading up to a platform from which you could mount your horse. As I write this, I noticed this morning while walking Minnie that it's been damaged slightly on one side. I was chatting to a fellow dog walker, and apparently a bus was trying to turn in the road and struck it, taking off a small slice of the red sandstone. I'm sure the local authority will follow up with the bus company to have it properly repaired. In the centre of the village there are some lovely eateries, and some of you that visited in the past to play golf locally perhaps will remember the Ducks Inn. Well, that's now been sold, but it has been replaced, and the new inn is called the Leddie, a newly refurbished and tastefully renovated boutique hotel. I've been in for dinner a couple of times, and the food is superb, and as it's dog-friendly, Minnie was allowed to join us. The Leddie also offers sumptuous accommodation, so it deserves the recent accolades it's received from the travel industry. Well, I'm pleased to say that I caught up with the general manager of the Leddie, Robert Clark, and I started by asking how long had he been in the general manager role.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for popping by. It's great to see that the local community are enjoying the project. So I've been on board since March, so it was part of the pre-opening team. Very exciting challenge to be part of. Had great support from our team at Wirefox, and we opened middle of July, and it's been a great journey so far.
Super. And where did you come from, Robert?
So for the last 11 years of my career, I worked with Tom Kitchen. So I was at the Kitchen in Leith, the Scranton Scally, and most recently I opened and ran the Bonnie Badger in Gullane.
Wow.
And yes, I think a great journey so far, and long may it continue.
Marvellous. The Bonnie Badger Gullane, very well known. I've been there a couple of times as well. And how are you enjoying Aberlady?
Oh, it's been great, and I think the feedback has been superb and the support has been fantastic. So it's actually been great to showcase it to the local community.
Indeed. So where do you think your niche market lies?
A huge part of East Lothian and is the golf. It's a huge driving factor between the visitors, especially sort of April to September. East Lothian has so much to offer. It's fantastic beaches, great walks, the lovely Lammermuir Hills. So, we'd want to be known as a place for leisure as well. And with the kitchen team, we have a great food offering. So hopefully people will travel from far and wide.
Yes, and as I mentioned, I've eaten there a couple of times. Who's your chef at the moment? Because the food is rather lovely.
A gentleman called Sean Lund. He and the kitchen team work very, very well together. Got good sous chef as well, and a few young and passionate people in that kitchen.
Well, I can certainly testify to a culinary delight. Of course, another very important member of the team is Siobhan, and she is the assistant manager, who I understand, Robert, is your wife.
Indeed, yes. Some might think, how on earth do you manage that? For me, it's all I know. We met in our previous roles. And yeah, it's good having someone that you can 100% trust to be part of the journey with you. And it's been great.
Well, that's marvellous. Well, Robert, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to chat to the Unique Scotland podcast, and look forward to popping down to see you at some stage in the next few weeks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on.
All the very best. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was Robert Clark, the General Manager of the Leddie in Aberlady. Well, you leave Aberlady a few moments later and continue along the coast, and you can see Aberlady Bay on your left as you drive along the coast heading towards Gullane. At the next turning, take a right and you will see signs for the Merton Motor Museum, and that's spelt Myreton, Merton Motor Museum, a real hidden wee gem that's often bypassed. It was founded by Willie Dale in 1966 and has cars, motorcycles, trucks dating from as far back as 1899. A real treasure trove of motorised memorabilia, if that's what floats your boat. Well, retrace your steps, and I've lost track of the number of golf courses we've passed, but you will now drive literally through a couple more golf courses. Well, actually the road goes through them, and before you know it, you're in the small town of Gullane, or some people would pronounce it Gullane. It's a lovely small town of some 3,000 residents, and as you drive through the golf courses, you can see the sizable Tudor-style houses overlooking the courses and the countryside beyond. It actually was voted as one of the best places to live in Britain, and you'll see why. As you enter the long town frontage, there are some interesting shops, cafes and superb restaurants, which is a bit of a nice surprise. Just as the road bends right into the town, on the left-hand side are the ruins of St Andrew's Kirk from the 1100s, which was only abandoned in 1612 because there was a problem of sand blowing into and over the kirk, threatening to inundate it. A beautiful little ruin which you can step inside. Once you're in the village, onto Rosebery Place, you'll find my dentist, a pharmacy, an antique shop, an interior design shop and small supermarket, as well as ice cream parlour and family butchers, all side by side. A strange mix, but this is what makes a small town so desirable, the wee artisan shops, added to which the cafes and restaurants are fab, such as the Petunier, the old clubhouse, the Bonnie Badger where Robert Clark worked, or a lovely wee cafe called the Goose on the Green. Of course, you'll find golf shops and even art shops, but when I visit, especially with the grandchildren, it's usually the ice cream parlour, Emma's Gelato, that I head for first, then the fabulous Gullane Beach, probably one of the best in East Lothian. It's a 1 mile stretch of golden sands with huge sand dunes where the children will climb to the top and slide down the sandy slopes, and beyond the dunes themselves there are miles of rough paths to explore and enjoy. Now, I've mentioned driving through the golf courses to the west of Gullane just before entering the town. Well, just to the south of Gullane is also Lough Ness New Golf Club. To the east of the town is the wonderful golf club of Muirfield, home to the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers and the oldest organised golf club in the world. It was founded in Leith in 1744 before settling at Muirfield in 1891. Now, for those golfers amongst you, you will understand what a prestigious event the Open is. Well, the UK Open Championship has been held here on 16 occasions, with 2013 being the most recent. And if you are looking forward to staying in the local area while you play golf, you should be aware that the fabulous Grey Walls Hotel overlooks the 10th tee at Muirfield. It was built as a country house, originally in 1901 with Sir Edward Lutyens as the architect, and was later extended by the famous Scottish architect Sir Robert Lorimer. And just to finalise the golf scene to the east of Gullane, I just have to mention the Renaissance Club, which is a private members club, and you'll need 2 members to propose you if you wish to join, but I do know that it's a super course. Then there's Archerfield, closer to North Berwick than Gullane, but this time there's not 1 but 2 challenging 18-hole championship courses. One's a mix of pine forest and a fast-running links, and the other a traditional but challenging links course. It has a great clubhouse, and I've sometimes popped in to meet friends for lunch, and I've had the occasional business meeting in there as well. Great food and wonderful staff. But on the way to the clubhouse, on your left-hand side, you'll see a signpost to Archerfield's walled garden, and what a delight to visit there. As it suggests, the walled garden is in effect a garden centre. However, there's an exquisite shop for all your gardeny things, and attached is a fabulous cafe, with all the usual freshly baked bread, scones and lovely cakes, and plenty of space to enjoy a break from reality. Oh, and just outside the cafe is an enclosed play area for your children to while away half an hour as you enjoy some downtime. From Archerfield you get back onto the A198, and North Berwick is only 10 minutes drive, but before you get there you'll drive through the delightfully small village of Dirleton, with a population of around 3,000, and dare I say it, what another absolute delight. In the centre of this settlement is a beautiful village green, and overlooking this green is the Castle Inn, a lovely pub cum restaurant with accommodation. I had a wonderful stay there for a couple of nights when I was getting to know East Lothian better before I moved into the area. But more excitingly, the inn is named after the castle that sits on the other side of the green. Yes, it's Dirleton Castle. You can't miss it. It's a sizable medieval fortress, and now in the care of Historic Environment Scotland. The castle dates from the 13th century and was built by an Anglo-Norman family named De Vaux. It's built on solid rock and is perfectly positioned to protect the coastal route from the English border to Edinburgh. Mind you, that did not stop the castle being taken by the English in the 14th and 15th centuries. However, it was Cromwell's army in 1650 who slighted the castle, or destroyed it, and left it in the ruinous state we find today. So for a castle that old, it's still in pretty good shape, with plenty to see and a great place to visit. If you walk north from the castle, past the Castle Inn, across the green and down Manse Road, you will eventually come to Dirleton Church. A manse, by the way, is a house for a minister. The Church of Dirleton Kirk, as we call it in Scotland, dates from the 1600s and is linked to the old 12th century Gullane church that I mentioned before. This area used to be the diocese of Gullane, G-O-L-Y-N, which is where Gullane gets its name. As I mentioned earlier, the Gullane Kirk was in danger of being inundated by sand, so the new church was built here in Dirleton to replace it. It's a very pretty sandstone church surrounded by an attractive churchyard with beautifully sculpted yew trees and several benches to allow contemplation in this delightful and peaceful setting. It's open daily for visitors, and I'd recommend popping in to have a wee look when you're in the village. Well, continue on from the church and there's a lovely walk down to the sea where you eventually come to the delightful Yellow Craigs Beach, another wonderful yellow sanded expanse. Not far offshore, you'll see an island called Fidra Island, and if you're a reader of Robert Louis Stevenson books, then his tale of Treasure Island uses the shape of Fidra Island in his fantasy novel. He was a regular visitor to this area and his imagination must have been sparked by the island. The building of the lighthouse on Fidra Island was overseen by his father, Thomas Stevenson, one of the famous family of Stevenson lighthouse builders. At the time, young Robert Louis must have been a bit of a disappointment to his father for refusing to go into the lighthouse business, but he was still taken around the coast to visit the sites of lighthouses while his father and uncles were undertaking their building jobs or indeed the maintenance of the lighthouses themselves. Well, from Dirleton, we get back on the road heading east to North Berwick. And before I talk about it, if you haven't already noticed it, there's a small pointed hill that stands out on the landscape just ahead to the right of the road. This is Berwick Law, which is a volcanic plug, and I'm going to come back to it when we do visit North Berwick in my next podcast, which is episode 2 of East Lothian, and I'm probably going to suggest a small climb to the top. But time has now run out, and this is the end of episode 1 of the Edinburgh Coast East Lothian podcast. It's been a blast having you with me on our journey down this wonderful coastline with a look at some of the towns and villages and looking back at some of Scotland's most dramatic historic moments. Well, next time we'll take up where we left off, entering North Berwick and having a look at the Seabird Centre and more of the wonderful beaches that litter the East Lothian coastline. And what secrets lie in North Berwick's old kirk, where Satan himself was supposed to have appeared to the witches of that town? And what are the views from Berwick Law? From here we'll travel down to Dunbar, with its main high street with a mix of medieval and modern buildings, and also the home of John Muir, Scotland's son and the father of national parks in America. Some interesting sculptures of the great man as well in this area. On our return to Edinburgh, we'll call into the National Museum of Flight to see a World War II Vulcan bomber as well as a more modern aircraft, Concorde. We'll also call into the Glenkinkie Distillery and taste a lowland malt whisky enjoyed all over the world. And I'll share with you a few more wee hidden gems, such as the Yester Dairy Farm, which you can visit to meet the cows and to watch the cheese-making process, or the Dunmuir Hotel in Dunbar, a family-run business that takes cuisine to another level. And we'll be able to hear from the proprietors of these places as well. As always, it's been great to bring this podcast to you. And I'm always delighted to have heard from so many of you who've listened to the podcasts, and it's always great to meet some of you personally. And here's a wee story of being surprised when I was visiting Culloden Battlefield with some clients recently. My guests were shopping and a few people had asked if they could have a photograph with me in my kilt. I'm always pleased to have a photo taken with tourists, but you could have knocked me down with a feather when one young lady, Lisa Gullane, asked me if my name was John. I confirmed that it was, then asked how she knew. Well, here's how the conversation went. Here I am standing in the wonderful visitor centre of Culloden Battlefield, and a young lady has just come up to me, having identified me that I do some podcasting, and I'm just going to say hi, and can you just tell me what your name is?
Lisa.
Lisa, how did you recognise me?
From your Facebook page after listening to the podcast.
Well, that is just amazing. I can't believe it. Well, Lisa, I hate to say this, but you're going to be on a podcast in the near future, okay?
That is quite all right.
Where'd you come from?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio. This is your friend?
Yes, this is Jen.
Jan, how nice to meet you, Jan.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Do you mind being on a podcast as well?
No, not at all.
Great.
Not at all.
And how have you enjoyed Culloden Battlefield?
We have not toured it.
You haven't toured it yet?
No,
right,
we
well,
just arrived.
I'll leave that to you. This gentleman to my right, your name is?
I'm Stuart.
Stuart you're actually a guide here.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Fantastic. People like this will make your day an absolute wonder. Can I just say, listen, first of all, thanks for listening to the podcast. Great to see you, and all the very best for the rest of your time in Scotland.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Hate to say this, guys, you're going to be on.
Oh, that's amazing.
I love the fact that Stuart, the local Culloden guide, was so taken aback, and you can hear him say in the background, "That's amazing," at the end. Anyway, Lisa and Jan, thank you for stopping me and letting me know that you're listeners to my podcasts. And do please let me know how much you enjoyed the Culloden experience. On my last tour, I had two lovely ladies, Barbara Linnick and Chris Thurmond, and they hail from Texas. And we had a wonderful tour around Scotland, taking in Skye and also Inverness, where Barbara was able to step back in time and visit those places her ancestors had come from. It was very special. And I also learned that Barbara was a great fan of the TV series Outlander. So on the way back to Edinburgh, I surprised her with a visit to Midhope Castle, which, in the series, is Lallybroch Castle, or Jamie Fraser's family home. Anyway, here's our final chat just before they departed. I've got with me Barbara and Chris in the back. We're just heading back to Edinburgh now to drop them off. And before we go, I thought I'd just get them to say a few words. But first of all, Barbara, first time seeing Lallybroch, what did you think?
I loved it. It was beautiful, and you could imagine all the scenes there and just kind of picture all the actors and actresses. It was perfect.
Yeah, I think when people first see it, having seen the series, that's the normal reaction. And I have to say, it's quite an impressive castle as well. Interesting enough, we've just done the 7-day tour. Any particular highlights around Scotland?
All of them. Inverness, we really enjoyed hunting for some ancestors in Inverness. We loved the look of Skye and all the beautiful scenery, and everything's magical.
Thank you, Barbara. And we've got Chris beside you. Chris, you seem to have had a lovely time. Just remind us where you're from.
Yes, I'm from Texas.
Texas. I love it. I love Chris's accent. We've had lots of chats and lots of laughs about things Texian. Anyway, what was your highlight, Chris?
I like the mountains. Really nice. And they're everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just everything. It's just really magical. And we don't have. Yeah, we don't have these types of mountains.
What about the temperature? Is Texas a little bit warmer than Scotland, I believe?
Yes, since we've been here, it's been 101 degrees back home, and this is very nice. Not sweaty at all.
Yeah, we're down to about 12 degrees here, so that'd be about 55 to 60 here. So you've had 100 degrees back home, so yeah, it's been quite nice. Super. Well, ladies, it's been great having you with us. Sorry to see you go. Heading back to the States, and look forward to seeing you come back to Scotland at some stage. So bye for now.
Bye. We'll be back.
Well, thank you, ladies. It was an absolutely cracking tour of Scotland, and I was delighted and honoured, actually, Barbara, to help you track down your ancestors. During the summer, I will be out roaming the roads somewhere around Scotland with guests, so take a leaf out of Lisa's book. If you recognise me on the road, stop me and say hi. I never charge for photographs, and you may even be part of a future podcast. Keep your messages of support coming, and don't forget, if you do intend visiting Scotland without a formal guide, then perhaps one of my bespoke itineraries may help you plan a more spectacular holiday. Well, as always, I have thoroughly enjoyed bringing a part of Scotland to you. I always welcome feedback, so if you wish to comment on any of the areas we've visited today, or if you wish me to cover any aspect of Scottish life, then please do get in touch through the contact page on my website, or send an email directly to info@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. Thank you so much to those of you who have bought me a coffee, and if you wish to contribute in a small way to these podcasts, all you simply do is Google buymeacoffee.com/Unique Scotland. All contributions are much appreciated. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you all listening today, and I would now like to sign off in traditional Scottish fashion by raising my glass with a wee dram to you wherever you are in the world. Slanjava.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.
Hey moms, looking for some lighthearted guidance on this crazy journey we call parenting?
Join me, Sabrina Kohlberg.
And me, Andy Mitchell, for Pop Culture Moms,
where each week we talk about what we're watching
and examine our favorite pop culture moms up close to try to pick up some parenting hacks along the way.
Come laugh, learn, and grow with us as we look for the best tips.
And maybe a few what not to do's from our favorite fictional moms.
From Good Morning America and ABC Audio.
Pop Culture Moms. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.